The Chicago Bears are getting trade calls about Gervon Dexter, and all signs point to Ryan Poles rebuilding this defensive line from the inside out.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. And on the show today, we're going to catch up on the latest trade rumors from the NFL Combine, where the Bears are reportedly getting calls about defensive tackle Gervon Dexter as a potential trade candidate as he enters the last year of his rookie contract. We will also hear from Ryan Poles on his evaluation of where the defensive line stands right now, with a couple of guys coming off of injuries that he's fairly confident in them coming back and performing at a higher level, and maybe pointing then to where he'll make less of a change and leaving other spots in the defensive line to be more of the fluctuation points. And we'll wrap up with an update on Max Crosby, where the Raiders general manager gave a pretty firm answer as to what their plans are this offseason with Max and what that now means for the Chicago Bears as they look to upgrade their defensive line. We'll put all of the pieces together on the show today. I do want to thank you for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. But it came out as kind of a surprise Thursday morning when insider Jordan Schultz reported that the Chicago Bears were fielding trade calls for Gervon Dexter, that teams were specifically calling the Chicago Bears, inquiring about the potential for trading for Gervon Dexter, which was not a name that was on our radar as a strong trade away candidate. Someone who, sure, the jury is still out, and we talked but earlier this week on the podcast about how he's coming on the last year of his rookie contract and he hasn't shown enough to be worth a big-time contract extension at this stage of the process. But it wasn't as though he's an obvious player that's worth giving up on and casting away to another team. But as you start to talk to people around here and read between the lines a little bit more, you can start to understand a little bit more where this might be coming from. One of the themes we've talked about on this podcast this offseason is that Dennis Allen will have the opportunity to get more of his style of guys in this defense. That when he came in last year, the Bears didn't have a lot of flexibility to change around the defensive personnel. He inherited 2 starting safeties. He inherited the linebackers. He inherited a lot of the defensive line. They went out and signed free agents at defensive end and defensive tackle, but a lot of these guys he was kind of more or less stuck with for the first year to kind of see, how do they fit in my scheme? How do I like them? How do I not? And now that he's had a full year of coaching these guys and working with them, he can have a better understanding of there's some guys I definitely like and want to keep around, and some other guys that might not be the ideal fit for what I, Dennis Allen, want to do. And so Gervon Dexter feels like he might fit in that category of, not that he's a bad player by any means, but just not ideal for what Dennis Allen prefers. And if, he's entering the last year of his rookie contract, you're probably going to let him walk in free agency then a year from now. Why not potentially trade him and even get some kind of draft pick compensation, as opposed to letting him walk in free agency and hoping for a compensatory pick, but depending on the kind of contract he's going to get, he's probably not going to bring you much in that department. I don't think he's going to bring you much in trade compensation right now either, but it's more of a guaranteed something as opposed to hoping a year from now maybe he gets a big enough contract that might give you some kind of something there. But I think when I look at Dennis Allen's defense and the types of defensive tackles he has preferred over the years, it's a little bit different than the Matt Eberflus defense. And I think Dexter was a better fit for what Eberflus wanted in terms of, we talked a lot about how those 2 defensive tackle positions were a little bit more interchangeable for Eberflus. Whether you're a nose tackle or a 3 technique, you kind of shift between the two plenty, and that versatility was valuable for Dexter and for a little while Zach Pickens in there too, that they could kind of move around a little bit, and maybe they didn't have exactly a clear identity of what they were as a player, but they could kind of help you out in multiple ways. But Dennis Allen, on the other hand, hasn't preferred typically that style of player. That more generally, when you look back at his New Orleans defenses, he tends to have more, I don't want to say more traditional type of players in those roles, but like, when you think about a big run-stuffing nose tackle, the 340-pound type of guy, like, he would have more of that true two-gap fill space in the middle type guy, and then more of a super athletic, fast, explosive, pass-rushing defensive tackle that may end up being a little bit lighter in the weight category, but still can kind of get upfield and be disruptive in the middle. And Gervon Dexter doesn't fit neatly into either of those categories. He's kind of in between, which is what they wanted in Matt Eberflus's defense, but less of what they want for Dennis Allen's defense. You look, and Dennis Allen has never drafted a defensive tackle who weighed more than 300 pounds before the 6th round every year. He's used plenty of early draft picks on defensive tackles, but they're all lighter, quicker, athletic defensive tackles. Gervon Dexter has not been that type of like quick off the snap, athletic, explosive type of player. He's got athletic tools for sure. He's got size and he can move pretty well, but like that sort of explosiveness out of the snap has not been there. So like he's not quite the shifty, explosive pass rushing defensive tackle that Dennis Allen might like, nor is he quite the humongous, powerful run stuffing nose tackle Dennis Allen might like. And so he kind of ends up an odd man out from a scheme perspective. Not that he's not someone who at least could fill in and get the job done this past season, but maybe not ideally what he would like in that spot. And so that's, I think, where we get to these potential trade conversations coming out here in Indianapolis. Plus, the production wasn't quite where you would want it in either way. Like he was a good pass rusher, but not a great pass rusher. He was okay against the run, but not particularly strong. Like not dominant and really locking it down there. So you can start to make some sense of like why they might be willing to move him, even if the return on the trade is far below the 2nd round pick you invested in Gervon Dexter, because you're not getting anywhere close to that if you're trading Gervon Dexter today. We just saw on Thursday the Tennessee Titans traded their former 2nd or 3rd round nose tackle Tavondre Sweat to the New York Jets for the edge rusher Jermaine Johnson, former 1st round pick of theirs. Like that's the kind of deal I could see something like Gervon Dexter bringing, where you are trading your castaway draft pick for another team's castaway draft pick. Like, could you do Gervon Dexter and some picks to the Giants for Kayvon Thibodeau? I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't know if they would want Gervon Dexter, but from a Bears perspective, that kind of deal would make some sense. I was looking at other recent defensive tackle trades, and you're not going to like the type of compensation other teams have been seeing at that position. It's a lot of 6th and 7th round pick types of swaps. When you think about it, like you would be trading for a guy who's on the last year of his rookie contract. So you don't have long-term control over him. You may have to give him a new big contract, or at least a bigger contract, and he hasn't quite produced up to the level that you would like. Like I look back last year before the regular season started, the Chiefs traded for Derek Nottie from the New York Jets, swapping a 6th and 7th round pick. The Vikings traded Harrison Phillips, also to the New York Jets, swapping 6th and 7th round picks. The Jets had also traded defensive tackle Jawan Briggs, swapping 6th and 7th round picks. The Jaguars and the Saints swapped defensive tackle Kalen Saunders for center Luke Fortner. Like it's kind of either cast-off player for cast-off player, or we're swapping 6th and 7th round picks. Like that's probably the type of compensation we're looking for with Gervon Dexter. So I'm curious to see, how those conversations go this week at the Combine when Ryan Poles is talking to other teams and saying, well, could you get a left tackle to fill in for a year by trading away Gervon Dexter? Could you get a cornerback at the end of his rookie contract for Gervon Dexter? Another safety. I mean, I think you're not going to get a guy that's like Pro Bowl stud who's a proven prospect that is going to be a great player, because Gervon Dexter's not that. Like at the end of the day. So I think it's just about trying to recoup value if you're the Chicago Bears and saying, hey, this relationship is probably coming to an end anyway. And I think that's going to result in some really significant turnover, especially on the interior of this defensive line. Like that seems to be where the emphasis is going to be right now from Ryan Poles, especially the way he talked about some of the defensive ends on the roster. So we'll hear what the general manager said about his level of confidence in Dio Odengbo returning from injury, as well as where last year's 2nd round pick Shamar Turner fits into this conversation. Why all these signs kind of point to defensive tackle is going to get overhauled. Defensive end might not be quite so much. We'll hear what the general manager said and break it all down next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. I was just watching Wednesday night the big matchup between the Pistons and the Thunder, top two teams in each conference going head-to-head. I don't think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played, but Cade Cunningham was electric. Wouldn't surprise me if either of those two teams, or both, are in the NBA Finals. And if you want to lock in one of them or someone else for a deep run, this is the perfect time to place your bets, because not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the Finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So if the Chicago Bears trade Gervon Dexter, they're really not going to have much of anything left on the defensive tackle depth chart right now, except for Grady Jarrett returning for his second season. He was dealing with injuries a lot last year, but all of a sudden, that position would look pretty barren. I mean, you got other free agents you could re-sign. We'll talk about them in a second here, but that's a spot that clearly is pointing to overhaul happening, and Dennis Allen wanting better from that position in terms of a more consistent interior pass rush and a more stout interior run defense in terms of not letting them get gashed up the middle nearly as often as before. And if there's a linebacker to replace Tremaine Edmonds, that can improve the run defense as well. It's not just the defensive tackles, but I think that's where you're going to see Chicago start and put a little bit more of the emphasis on this offseason, because Ryan Poles talked this week about how he views his defensive line, and specifically the defensive ends, the guys who ended last season injured in Dio Dangbo and then Shamar Turner as well, both dealing with significant injuries there, that he's confident in the injury recovery, and it sounds like they've got full faith that these guys can come back and produce at a higher level next season than we got this season and provide a boost and improved play on the defensive line just sort of naturally with the guys that are already here. So here's how Ryan Poles talked about the injuries to those two guys and the recovery process and where they fit in the equation.
Both those guys, just in terms of both their injury and then what you kind of saw from them during the season.
Yeah, so Dio was a little bit unfortunate. He was the guy we brought in that we wanted to work inside and outside. And due to some of the injuries, I thought Book was coming along in training camp. He had, I think, a knee injury at some point in the beginning. So we really didn't get to flex as much as we wanted to try to improve our rush from the interior and exterior. But he was coming along. There was a lot of positive things there, both in the run, which I know we don't talk much about, but getting the third down is a huge deal. So I thought he was coming along. We're looking forward to him coming back. I know he's training in his return to play protocol. Shamar was another one, has flex, that we were trying to find out where he was going to be the most productive, and it was coming along at end, which was great because he would have versatility inside and outside, which is what we want. And so it was a bummer, kind of a freak deal with him and his knee. Both guys are on track, training hard. Again, I'm hoping in the spring, but if anything, training camp will be the spot where they come back. And there's a process through that of playing the game and getting comfortable and healthy that we'll go through, but I expect both those guys to help us next year.
The funny thing about doing this show live at the NFL Scouting Combine is that while that Ryan Poles clip was just playing, Atlanta Falcons general manager Ian Cunningham just walked by on his cell phone. The timing would have been better. Would have loved to pull him over and get his thoughts on Gervon Dexter. Not that he would have commented, but still, funny how that works. But as to get back to what Ryan Poles was talking about there, I think you heard in him a confidence in Dio Dangbo and Shamar Turner, not necessarily in them solving all of their problems, but including them as part of this calculation of how this Bears defensive line will perform next season. There's a faith that they're going to come back and be a part of this equation. Now, I think to me that signals a certain amount of hey, don't expect necessarily, the huge splash defensive end addition necessarily. I think when you look at this Bears defensive line depth chart right now, when you talk about Shamar Turner coming back and playing defensive end, Dio Dangbo coming back playing defensive end, you've got Montez Sweat under contract, you've got Austin Booker under contract, you've got 4 defensive linemen sitting there at the top of your depth chart. 2 of them are injured as we speak today, but as Ryan Poles said, should be back by training camp at the very latest, if not much, much earlier this spring. So you've got 4 defensive ends under contract right now, and if you trade away Gervon Dexter, you will have 1 defensive tackle under contract in Grady Jarrett, because Chris Williams is a free agent, Andrew Billings is a free agent, and then Jonathan Ford is also a free agent. And so all of a sudden, you've got to add a bunch of defensive tackle, and you don't have a ton of room to add a defensive end. Like, I think Ryan Poles is smart enough to know that, like, hey, they should still try and add something at the defensive end position because there's a lot of unproven talent there. But when you have those 4 guys in Sweat, Odangbo, Booker, and Turner, like, there's not a lot of playing time for many more players at that position. There's not a lot of, like, roster space. You're only going to keep 4 or 5 defensive ends likely at that position. Now, the thing that Ryan Poles specifically talked about in that clip that I don't want to move past or overlook is that the plan was Odangbo would play defensive end and kick inside the defensive tackle. And we've already seen Shamar Turner playing both positions. It's a big part of what Dennis Allen wants to be able to do is to have those bigger defensive ends so that they can kick inside and not be vulnerable against the run or be too small in there and get bullied by guards. And so presumably there is room for a 5th defensive tackle in this rotation, defensive end, in this rotation, if Odangbo is going to play some defensive tackle and Shamar Turner is going to play some defensive tackle. Like, they could go out and sign a free agent or use an early draft pick on an edge rusher. Definitely, I think they will do something, one of those 2 types of things, a draft pick or a mid to small level free agent signing there. But I just don't think it's going to be quite the priority that defensive tackle has to be by nature of where the roster stands right now. Like, they're going to need to get some kind of big nose tackle. It's not going to be early in the draft. I would not expect, they're going to take the huge Ohio State defensive tackle. I think, if anything, Peter Woods from Clemson looks like the ideal Dennis Allen pick, although Peter's not going to run drills at the combine, so we're going to have to wait for the pro day to see just how fast he is. But, the Clemson defensive tackle is the Dennis Allen first-round pass rusher defensive tackle, the Sheldon Rankins, the Brian Bresee. He drafted David Onyemata in the 4th round. Like, he's much more in that Dennis Allen mold that I would fully expect if he's there at 25, that the Bears will have a hard time passing on him at that spot. But, like, they're going to need to go out and sign another pass rushing defensive tackle in free agency, another run-stuffing nose tackle in free agency. Like, that, to me, is where we should expect a lot more of the investment, the emphasis, and the turnover. Whether I think that's wise is maybe a slightly different conversation. So I do think the investment on the interior definitely needed. I do question whether Ryan Poles is too confident in Odangbo and Turner and the defensive end group as it is. I just don't think, I know he was complimentary of Odangbo, saying, hey, things were starting to come together right before he got hurt, and, he's better against the run, and that doesn't get as much attention. Fair enough, but, the pass rush that we were seeing was not anywhere close to good enough, and I didn't think the run setting the edge, the run defense there was as good as he was making it out to be either. So I have my doubts that, a defensive end group that's primarily Sweat, Odangbo, Booker, and Shamar Turner, that still doesn't feel good enough to me. I would like to see a more premium investment in there. That doesn't mean Trey Hendrickson necessarily, doesn't necessarily mean a first-round pick, but, I just don't want him to throw in replace Dominique Robinson with some backup guy and say good enough. That's a competition and a rotation there. I want that to be more of a priority, and to say you can't have too many good players at the spot, so just go out and get them, add more, and say, yeah, there's not playing time for all of them, but who cares? Have too many, that's a great problem to have. I would rather have more good pass rushers and defensive ends than I can play than have not nearly enough good ones to play like the Bears were last season. It just feels like injuries are too convenient of an excuse there. It's a real explanation for part of the problem, but the problem existed before the injuries as well. So I'm not convinced that, when Jarrett and Odangbo and Turner are healthy, everything's going to be fine, because it wasn't fine before that either. So we'll see. Not a lot of time left between now and free agency. We'll see what a trade might bring. Certainly you could add a defensive end via trade and start to build this defensive line out a little bit more. But it's sounding less and less likely that Max Crosby is going to be in the mix for the Chicago Bears, in part because of what we just heard from Ryan Poles, but also what the Raiders are saying. We got to hear from Las Vegas Raiders general manager John Spytek down here at the Combine, who tried to be as emphatic as he could about where things stand with Max Crosby and the Raiders and why he's not ready to move move on from him or part ways there. So we'll check in on the situation with the Raiders and how that might affect what the Bears want to do on their defensive line next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy, and now is the time for the 5 Hour Energy Flavor Draft with 18 different flavors to choose from, including new options like Confetti Craze, Fruity Rainbow, or Cotton Candy. There is something for everyone. But for me, if I'm putting the number one pick on my board from 5 Hour Energy, it is the classic berry flavor. It's big, it's bold, with notes of raspberry and blackberry, but it has a smooth sweetness without being that overly sugary. It's a pick-me-up without being a total punch in the face, with a light little tartness in there to balance it out. It's just familiar, it's easy to recognize, it is all reliable, and that's definitely my number one pick for 5 Hour Energy flavors. But there's a bunch of different things you can try. We mentioned the new ones, Confetti Craze, the Fruity Rainbow, the Cotton Candy, and so many more. You can find your new favorite flavor of 5 Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. Do want to thank you again for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And when you tune in, it makes it possible for me to be able to come down like here to the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis and bring you these shows live on scene and get to talk to the coaches, the general managers, the players, and all of the above. So whether it's your first time tuning in or your 1,000th time tuning in, we really appreciate you making us a part of your day. If you want to take your listening to the next level, you can check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club, which is going to give you access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears that's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any of your favorite podcasting apps. Plus, you'll also get access to an exclusive Locked On Bears listeners group chat in the Locked On Everydayers Club Discord server. So if you want to check all that out, the website to go to is lockedonbears.supercast.com. Otherwise, you can keep tuning in wherever you always tune in to Locked On Bears. We're free and available on all platforms. But the person who's not available, maybe for any platform, is going to be Max Crosby this offseason. I mean, never say never. I don't think it's totally off the table at this point, but the Raiders are doing the best they can to say, hands off, he's ours. Or at the very least, you better blow us away with an offer if you're going to try and pry Max Crosby out of their cold, dead hands, because it turns out he's a good football player. And the Raiders like those. Weird, right? And just as much as the Chicago Bears might like to have that player, so would the Las Vegas Raiders. And they already have him in the building, and they already gave him a big contract, like just a couple of seasons ago. Like, the new general manager, John Spytek, came in and, like, right away made Max Crosby the highest paid defensive player in football, quickly, like, trying to show him that he was a priority for them. And I think this has been true all along, is that, like, the Raiders have never been eager to move on from Max Crosby. It's been more about whether Max Crosby would kind of force his way out, or at least demand his way out enough to spark a move and a change there. But the Raiders general manager, John Spytek, is doing his best to kind of smooth that over and make it clear to everybody that, like, hey, that relationship is fine. Don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. And like, he was asked directly, like, do you anticipate Max Crosby will play for the Raiders this season? And he said yes. Here's how he followed that up.
Max is an elite player, and I've been very upfront from the start when I got here that, you know, we're in the business of having really good players on the team, and we need a lot more of them. And, you know, it's hard to build a great team without elite players.
What has been your communication like with Crosby over the last, month or so?
Max and I have a great relationship. He's in the building every day, getting healthy right now. We talk on the phone, we text. So I have a great relationship with Max.
Reports that came out during Super Bowl week, are you comfortable that you know where his head is on wanting to stay and that he wants to be a Raider?
Max and I have had great conversations. I'm comfortable there, yeah.
So you can see where, you know, he can't definitively 100% ever say, you know, he's never going to be traded by the Raiders, because I do think if a team comes in and blows them away, like John Spytek, the Raiders general manager, is smart enough to know that, like, the Raiders need a lot before they're going to be successful. They need really good players, and Max Crosby is one of those, and so they'd like to keep him and have him a part of the team. He also knows that, like, you know, if someone was willing to give him, 3 first-round picks and a good player or whatever, like, if he's trying to rebuild the Las Vegas Raiders, that might be able to stretch farther in the grand scheme of the team getting better than just Max Crosby. It's kind of like we talk about trading away DJ Moore from the Bears, right, where it's like, you don't want to get rid of the player necessarily. You'd like to be able to keep them around. But if that player as an asset can become something that you can turn into something to make your overall team better, like you subtract at one spot to get a net positive in a different area on your roster, then you do have to at least consider it. And I think that's basically where the Raiders sit right now. No one is going to get a bargain for Max Crosby. They're not looking to move Max Crosby, and they're trying to make it sound like Crosby wants to be there. They didn't say that, but like, hey, we've had conversations. He's in the building. He's working. He's trying to tell you, well, if you do the math, 2 + 2, that means he wants to be here. Even if he never actually said that, he's implying he wants to be there without directly saying it, because he knows that Crosby might still not want to be there, but they're trying their best to kind of hold firm on their position and their value there for that player. And I think that's what it's going to come down to, where could the Raiders still trade Max Crosby? Absolutely. But it's going to require a team comes and really blows them away with a big offer and is willing to outbid everybody else to give up the draft picks and players or whatever it's going to take to pry Crosby away. I don't believe the Chicago Bears are in that position to do so right now. I don't think Ryan Poles is particularly interested in that level of like mortgaging the future and going all in right now on this one player to be the difference maker for this team, because as we just talked about, like, A, he doesn't necessarily see defensive end as that big of a hole comparatively to defensive tackle, and B, because defensive tackle is now a big hole. Like, if you traded, draft picks and cap space and a good player to the Raiders for Max Crosby, you would not have picks or salary cap space left to sign all the defensive tackles you need, and sign the safeties you need, and sign a linebacker that you need, and maybe a left tackle, and all the other things you want to do on this roster. Like, the Bears have more to do than just Max Crosby. And so, yes, it was a fun idea. Like, yeah, if he makes a mess in Las Vegas and it's hard, they have to get rid of him, so their leverage is lower, so maybe you can get slightly better value on Max Crosby than by comparison. Sure, that was always sort of the dream there, but I think we can pretty firmly give up Chicago Bears Max Crosby hopes. Maybe another team comes and is more desperate and gives the Raiders everything. I mean, Spytek said they're open to trading the number 1 overall pick. It's the same idea, right? They're not going to trade the number 1 overall pick. They don't want to trade the number 1 overall pick, just like they don't want to trade Max Crosby. But they have to at least listen if somebody blows them away with an offer that can help them build their team even better than that asset they currently have can do alone. But it's not going to happen, and it's not going to be the Chicago Bears, certainly, if they do move on from Max Crosby. So I just think we're going to see that investment be more so on the inside. Enough faith in Dio Dengbo and Shamar Turner. Like, you have young players on the edge. And plus, should mention, too, that Max Crosby just had surgery. I don't remember exactly, something lower body. Not a massive, debilitating, like, not a concern for playing next season. But if you're trading for the player, he's not going to be able to pass a physical for weeks, if not months, at this point. And you can still make that trade, but it adds like 5% more of like a question mark or a doubt about, like, well, you got to make sure the surgery goes smoothly and the recovery and everything is on board. Like, it's Max Crosby, you'll take the risk anyway, but it's a non-zero factor. It's a small factor, but it is a non-zero factor in the potential Max Crosby trade discussion. So just a lot of moving parts there around that, but I think we can start to shift our attention and expectations more away from the big splash defensive ends. Not defensive end entirely, because I think they'll sign some kind of lower-end player and or draft some kind of pass rusher somewhere in there. But I think, like, when we talk about like where they might spend the most money in free agency, it's not a deep defensive tackle group either. But like somebody like John Franklin Myers from the Denver Broncos becomes like a top free agent target for me at this point, just to like get somebody in the building that would be a good fit there. But without a lot of guys in the market, that price is going to go up and up, and maybe the Bears end up having to go a little cheaper there and then use that first-round pick on a Peter Woods of some kind, or use a second-round pick at that position and feel a little bit more hamstrung to say, hey, we got to be able to upgrade this spot this way because it's just a little bit too important to go cheap there and leave it up. Like, this is about getting Dennis Allen's guys in this scheme, and he needs more at the defensive tackle position for sure. He's going to need another safety, going to need another linebacker, a lot of defensive changes for us to talk about all offseason long right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks again for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Coming back on Monday, but we might do some extra bonus Saturday content while we're still down here in Indianapolis. So keep tuning in wherever it is that you tune in to Locked On Bears to make sure that each and every time that you do, you'll get another opportunity to bear down.